All right, there we are. Look at that. We're live in the pre-show. Just getting ready to go. Viking Off-Roading is here. How you doing? And Wendy and I are here. And a few other people that just aren't in the chat room.
Also known as Mr. Eye Candy.
Who's Mr. Eye Candy?
Viking Off-Roading.
Oh, I didn't know that was his. I can't see the picture very well. Michael, I didn't actually know that was you all these weeks. So how about that? So I've been running most of the day. So feel like I have. Hey, Philip Blair. Hecket, he says, or he cat or Hecket. So he Kate.
He Kate.
He Kate.
It's been a day of it for both of us. So we literally are doing this on the run tonight.
We are. I'm just like, okay, is the knot right? Do I have the dimple right in the tie? Is the neck? I just said, I grabbed an older shirt off the hanger because I haven't pressed any of my new ones.
Thrown it together, so hopefully they'll like it.
Yes, we'll make it. We'll make it. And we're both blue today.
We are, which is kind of nice, right?
Very nice. I won't hold your blue against you, but I'll hold mine against you.
Do I make you blue?
Do you? Yes. Do I make you blue?
Have you ever had it blue?
Here we go. We got to go live. Good afternoon, good evening, whichever side of the pond you are on. Welcome to episode 21 of Robertson. Can you believe that, Wendy?
I can quite believe it, but it's so exciting. 21.
I just dribbled on my tie. How's that for an auspicious beginning to the show? So, yikes. You know, one thing I learned very early on as a young man, never try to iron a wet spot or press a wet spot out of your silk ties.
Yeah.
Because they will permanently stain. So welcome, everyone. We appreciate your being here to Roberts and Robertson, where I think we have some pretty good discussions. And we do everything here from relationship stuff to psychological stuff to self-help type of stuff to just, I think, relations in general. And we started off doing some historical shows as well. And so we're kind of going back into that today with today's show. And we're talking about Ostara or Eostre. And so Wendy, from just introducing the topic, just give us a little introduction as to what we're talking about today.
So everybody knows at the end of this week is going to be Easter. Good Friday, and you know, Easter over the weekend, and it seems to be something that we do, isn't it? Like, you know, our grandparents did it, our parents did it. We took up the tradition. Easter eggs, hot cross buns, rabbits, daffodils,
ham,
all that kind of stuff, right? And it's like, okay, none of that has got actually anything to do, apart from the hot cross bun, none of that's got anything to do with that, right?
Right.
So we thought we would look at the original beginnings of Easter.
Now, let's do this for anybody watching. We certainly don't mean to, by talking about pagan religion or
Right.
pagan spirituality and the roots, we're not saying to anybody anything negative or anything askance about why we in the West especially celebrate Easter at Easter time. I just want to put this disclaimer in that if you are Christian, Easter is a big holiday for us. We're not talking about the holiday itself and why it is celebrated the way it is in the church and in Western culture, but where it originally came from. So the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that is what Easter is all about in the Western sense. But and by the way, it did happen, unlike Christmas, it did happen in the spring of the year. It was, why do you think you, during Easter time, turn on your television or your telly, as they say over there in London? Why do you turn on your telly and you see the 10 Commandments played every year with Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner? Because that's the movie about the first Passover in the Exodus. And so Jesus died. Remember, if you read the biblical account, the whole episode with him before Pilate, before the high priest, that was all at Passover. And it was, remember the story? It was Pilate's custom at Passover to release a prisoner. And we all know the story from there. How about this guy? No, give us Barabbas. And so so we do not want to dissuade or discourage or make anybody feel like we are stepping on your religious sensibilities or your spirituality. But we do want to talk. Now, that's a long disclaimer to say we're going to talk about how did we come to celebrate Easter and why is it synced up with Passover? And so there we go, Wendy. That's the best way I think I can use to say to introduce this topic.
It's a bit sad, though, isn't it? We have to do it.
It is.
You should be able to celebrate both sides of the coin.
Why not?
The Christian version of Easter and also the pagan version of Easter. Because, it's been a bit of a day for both of us today. But it has. A bit of prep. But it's like Easter is all about new life, celebration. And this little fella here beside me, let me bring him in. Yes. I mean, actually, he's just a prop tonight, but he is like, everybody sees this and they're like, this is Easter, right? Easter bunny.
Right. Easter bunny
brings the sweets, the chocolates and everything like that, right? This guy brings it. And what has he got to do with Jesus, right? What does a rabbit got to do with Jesus? What does the chocolate eggs got to do with Jesus? Nothing.
What do jelly beans have to do with Jesus?
Exactly.
What does, waking up? Rainey showed me today the Easter baskets they got for the kids for Sunday.
Yeah.
And now there's none of our kids really, when you think about it, 8-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old that believe an Easter bunny comes into the house by night by stealth and leaves you candy. But you got these big plastic Easter eggs. They're huge. And you crack them open and they're just full of candy. So Easter has become another Halloween without the costumes. You get a bunch of candy. So,
and I mean, I grew up there. I remember like going to bed on like Easter Saturday and waking up to my mum had put like a little basket, beside the bed and with the eggs in it. But it's like, there are obvious reasons why the rabbit or the hare, I should actually say, was actually used to be in Easter and also eggs. So whether we want to look at I suppose the beginning of it is like, where does Easter get its name from? And there's lots of different reasons why that. Some say that obviously in most of Europe, Easter celebration gets its name from the Jewish festival, Passover, which occurs at a similar time to the spring equinox. So in Greece, Easter is called Pascha. In Italy, it is Pasqua. And if I say that right, and in France, it's Paques, I think.
And interesting that you say that. It made me remember something. When I was a little boy, I was 4 and 5 and 6 years old. My stepfather was Ukrainian from the old country. you know, and we always had at Easter time, his mother, Baba, grandma in Ukrainian, still very much goes Scotty, you know, she still had the heavy accent, but they would make Pascha bread. At least if I'm pronouncing that right, it was Pascha bread, and it was these tall, round cakes with a domed top on it, and it had frosting. The only part I liked was the frosted part. So, but I remember that. Just a random memory.
And it's like in Denmark, it's called Pasque, I think, but in Germany and English-speaking countries, obviously from my end of the woods, Easter took its name from the pagan goddess. And you and I have both been talking about this tonight. Eostre? That's how
I think it's just pronounced Ostara or Ostara.
Ostara, who is the goddess of spring and fertility.
Where you can actually hear the word Easter in that.
Absolutely. And it was around 300 AD, something like that, that Christianity was becoming so popular in Rome, which was obviously the center of the world back then. It was like, you know, everything was Rome was the mother country. And in 1312, Constantine converted to Christianity and put an end to the ongoing persecution of Christians. Because obviously he just, you know, he'd converted, but he knew that just because he did it didn't mean that the pagans would stop their rituals and traditions.
Right.
So he decided to adopt existing pagan rituals into Christian festivities. And in 325 AD, the church council first decided that Easter celebration should fall on the Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox, and thus Easter Sunday was born. And symbols that had been associated with the pagan holiday of rebirth and renewal, the rabbit, the
rebirth,
egg,
renewal, resurrection, all of that seemed to fit in. And let me quick answer Philip's question. He asked about Ishtar. Is Ishtar a form of Eostre or Ostara? And Ishtar's symbols were the lion, the morning star, which, by the way, Jesus was called the morning star, and 8 or 16 pointed stars, symbols of power. But the word Easter isn't really derived from Ishtar. It's totally different goddess, totally different name, the German Eostre. And I'm pronouncing the O, the Eostre, Eostre. You could just say that's really pronounced Easter. And she was the goddess of the dawn and the bringer of light. But Ishtar was not related to Easter.
And I think that it just goes to show you that, you know, this is what happened in a lot of cases. The Catholic Church decided to incorporate lots of pagan things and rituals into the church so that they could, like, in a way, push the other one out, right? Because obviously they became the most dominant religion. Now, I was just reading up on this today about eggs. So eggs are always a symbol of new life and rebirth, obviously, you know, reproduction, everything to do with that. And so in the Middle Ages, decorating and eating eggs on Easter was, you know, became very popular. They decorate and eat hard-boiled eggs following Easter Sunday's Mass after fasting throughout Lent. And this is why you'll still see eggs today, where you can paint them, you can buy them different colors, you can even buy Easter lights now. You know, it's all about reborn, you know, actually eating it. So when you're eating fertility, you know, you're eating the opportunity to be fertile and reborn. And then you come to this fella here, right?
Yes.
Rabbit. And I, you know, I thought I'd bring him in for the prop again, like I did with my horns.
Yes.
And obviously knows, like, how did a rabbit come into all of this? Because, you know, but apparently it goes back to the sacred symbol, the sacred symbol of the goddess. And you pronounce that for me, Scotty?
Eostre, or you could just say Eostre. So
yeah, she was a hare, and rabbits have long been considered a symbol of fertility due to their ability to shag a lot.
They shag a lot.
And reproduce quickly and in large numbers.
Now, by the way, you did mention that you wore your horns on Halloween. Why aren't you wearing your ears today?
Why am I not wearing my ears today? Because I actually haven't got my bunny ears, so I bought the nearest thing, which was the bunny.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting about that, it was 1722 when a German writer, and I'm see if I can pronounce this right, George Frank von Frankenow, and he recounted an Easter hare that hides coloured eggs for children to find. And this was the first time anyone had ever mentioned an Easter egg hunt. And that's where so basically along the way, you've got a bit of this, a bit of that, and a bit of the other, and they're all putting it into, this is all the pagan side of it, so rebirth, fertility, celebration, and then comes along Constantine, who goes, well, we need to bring these people on board, and that's when it came to.
Now, it's interesting that in the 8th century, the Venerable Bede, he was an Old English. He talked about how the Old English deity Eostre, and there's a line over the E, so I'm assuming we pronounce it that Eostre, is attested solely in his book, The Reckoning of Time. And he states it during, I've got to look at this to read it, Eostermanap. It's got a, I don't know what that letter is. It's a pronunciation thing. It looks like a small case P, but the stem goes up higher. So Eostermanap, and that's the equivalent of April. It was the pagan Anglo-Saxons had held feasts in Eostre's honor, but that the tradition by the 8th century, Bede said it had already kind of died out, and so by his time, he replaced it with the Christian Paschal month and a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, and it's very interesting that by way of a more or less a linguistic reconstruction, the matter of a goddess called Austro, Austro, in the Proto-Germanic language has been examined in detail since the foundation of Germanic philology. And in the 19th century by scholar Jacob Grimm, not the same Grimm's fairy tales, and others. And it descended from the Proto-Indo-European. Historical linguists have traced the name all the way back to Proto-Indo-European goddess of the dawn, Hewsos, Hewsos, from which may descend the common Germanic divinity at the origin of the Old English Eostre and the Old High German Ostara. So Ostara is the High German. And scholars have linked the goddess's name to a whole variety of Germanic personal names and a series of location names, toponyms, in England. And they discovered in 1958 over 150 inscriptions from the 2nd century BC or AD, referring to Matrone, Austriahene.
Yeah.
And so very interesting when you start breaking down. I find this stuff fascinating. Some people's eyes might glaze over at it. I find that fascinating to trace
It just goes to show that we follow these traditions because it's what all our families have done for so many years.
Yes.
My family used to go to church on Easter Sunday, and it was a big celebration. Easter was, we'd have lamb or something. It would be this great Easter holiday. Sadly, over here now, it's not as it once was. And, my mum is a great lover of hot cross buns. And you'll see them now, you'll get them throughout the year. But when I was growing up, it was always just at Easter time you would get them.
I got to tell you, I never associated hot cross buns, although now that you say it, I never associated hot cross buns with Easter. We didn't have those. We had the Pascha bread when I was a little boy. But hot cross buns, I guess it would make sense, huh?
Well,
So,
apparently, the infamous hot cross buns are another pagan tradition, but they're taken from the Saxons, who would bake fresh bread in honor of the goddess. The fresh buns would be marked with a cross, and at the time, the cross represented the 4 quarters of the moon, the 4 seasons, and wheel of life. And I think it's pretty obvious to see why they were then adopted by Christian festivities, where the symbol of a cross has a strong connection to the crucifixion. So
I have a
even
question about that.
go on.
About the bread. Does the bread, do you place strips of dough across to make a cross at the top of the bread, or is it the way it naturally splits? So it's like this
It
mystery
would
thing.
be made to make,
Okay,
it would
it's
be
made to.
make the
Okay.
cross. Because obviously, like, it depends how you buy them, because if you just buy the ones that are around all year, they've kind of just got like glazed top and there's like a little cross. But when you get them from the bakers and individual places like that, they seem to have really done, a bigger. But I don't
Yes.
think, the churches here still celebrate Easter. Of course they do. But what I'm saying is, I think we've lost a lot of a true interest in it, because it used to be where the family would come together and you would swap Easter eggs. And do you remember, like, I don't know if you guys did, but we used to have every Easter, it was like, who's got the Easter egg with the cup? Like, who's got the cup that goes with the Easter egg? It was a massive trend.
Something like that, yeah.
Still is in the UK. And we used to have, like, Cadbury's cream egg, Whisper, Mars bar, and you'd want to get
right.
That seems to have, like, now after Christmas is finished, they've already got Easter eggs going up.
Yes. Well, it's all commercialized, of course.
Yeah.
So, the Easter decorations are all out, and Easter baskets. Almost the day after Christmas, you walk into the big supermarkets, and all of a sudden, everything Christmas is gone, except to the discount shelf, and everything Easter is out in full bloom, and there's still, 3 feet of snow on the ground. So, hey, Elizabeth Richardson, by the way, in the chat room. Nice to have you here, and thank you. And so, Wendy, continue on. I don't know where I'm interrupting you, and I'm not. I'm just throwing in some thoughts as you're talking.
Jump in whenever, but it's like going back to the bunny, the egg, and and greeting cards. Let's be honest. If you go back in our history, everybody likes to send a card, Christmas, birthday, whatever. Hallmark has done very well on it. But it's like, my mum still sends Easter cards. She'll just be like, can you get some Easter cards for me? I wanna send them. And I don't know many other people our age that actually sends Easter cards, but I remember they used to be a really big thing. And apparently, obviously, like, they used to, once the greeting card started to use eggs and bunnies on their cards, Cadbury went, do you know what? There's a bit of a bonus there. We can come in there. And they started manufacturing chocolate eggs around the late 1800s, and the rest, they say, is history. So really, it's been a progression of, down the line, there was a niche in the market, and Cadbury's went, do you know what? I'm going to fill that. So the other thing is the hot cross bun, which is really popular over here. I don't know how popular it is with you guys. We could get all different flavors of it. And also, I always believed, when I was growing up, it was all about the crucifixion, and it was the cross, right? I had absolutely no idea that it was actually pagan origin. So obviously it was to mark the springtime, and, as I say, the 4 months, the 4 seasons, the moon. But actually, the symbolism of the cross on the bum was the 4 seasons, the four phases of the moon, and now Christianity. So I think whilst, a lot of people go on about, why does Easter Sunday move? Why does Easter Sunday move?
Right,
like Christmas is.
Why isn't it not the same date every year?
Well, Christmas, as you know, is the Christmas they gave us, which is the 25th of December. But the reason why Easter changed is because it always is the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or after the spring equinox. So if the full moon falls on a Sunday, then Easter will be the next week.
And the
Well,
full moon, I believe, was just last night.
That's right. And that's why it changes every year. So you're not going to have Easter every year on the same day,
And
which
so
is kind of crazy, really.
when you think about that, my fellow Christians, when you think about that, one of our most sacred holidays of the year, the death, the resurrection of Jesus,
Yeah.
is all synced up in Western culture to the changing of the moon cycle.
Yes.
How about that? You didn't learn that in Sunday school.
But they don't teach. I mean, this is the thing. Like, they don't teach you all sides of the coin, and I think they should
Right.
do, because then you are given a much rounded picture of it. But it's like, if no one. I remember like saying, "Why is Easter Sunday on a different day?" And I know you'd hear, "Oh, well, that's just what the government did. That's the day they picked." But actually, it's not. It actually is because it's the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on after the spring equinox. So we've just had our clocks change, what, 2026, something like that, or something like that.
Yeah, a week ago or so. Yeah.
And now we've got Easter, like, directly afterwards. But it just makes me realize that going back to my childhood and all the images that I was shown and all the traditions that I went through actually are pagan.
Yeah. And we're not trying to, with this program, align it and say, oh, the whole Jesus thing that came out of Ostara. We're not saying that.
No.
But we are saying, here, I've got this. Let me give this a shot. The Venerable Bede wrote about Easter Monap, the month of the goddess's story. He said, Easter monath qui nunc Pascalis menis interpretur quandam adea illorum que ester vocabutur et suti in illo festa celebrant nomen habuit a cajus nomine nunc Pascal tempus cog. Does my Latin
it's working for me,
Latin make you yes
it's working for me.
Cognominant concestu antique observatonis vocabulo gauda nove solemnitas vocantes. And what that actually means, it actually means Easter month has a name which is now translated as month, which was once called after a goddess of theirs named Easter, in whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. Now they designate that Paschal season by her name, calling the joys of the new rite by the time-honored name of the old observance. So something, as we all know, the church did, and the only point I'm making with that is that the church adopted, when they wanted to win the pagans over to Christianity in the early church, they weren't always trying, and this is something we talked about around St. Patrick's Day, is that St. Patrick wasn't vicious and vile and all of that stuff. He was actually fairly well liked by the pagans peoples around him. What he was trying to do was draw them in, and he drew them in, and the church's official stance became, we're going to adopt pagan holidays and incorporate them, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not incorporate, but blend them with Christian holidays. And this is why, well, what was December 25th? Wasn't that the birth date of Mithras, the Roman god? And became the birth date of Jesus, when Jesus was in fact probably born in the spring around Passover. Because, and there's one key thing, if I can share this, just because it's on the top of my head. Christmas time, the birth of Jesus. What did they say? That all the shepherds were around Bethlehem, and they went to visit him on the night of his birth. That they went and visited him because of the angelic visitation. Well, the only time of the year that shepherds brought their flocks in that close to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, which was about 6 miles away from downtown Jerusalem, was the spring for Passover, and to make all those lambs available for sacrifice. And so that's a key right there. Yeah. Oh.
That's another symbol, though, of Easter, isn't it? Because
Yes.
over here you'll see lambs on cards as
Yes.
well, right? So
Yes.
that just goes to show another version of it.
Yes. And the snakes, by the way, Philip, St. Patrick was liked by everyone except the snakes, he said. And
Yeah.
who were the snakes? That's what Julius Caesar dubbed the Druids, was the snakes. And of course, Patrick was 400 years later, but that moniker stuck. And so when he drove the snakes out of Britain, he was driving the old Druidic religion out of Britain. And I think Patrick would be the first one. Could we interview him to say, not to say, well, yeah, I by force drove them out. I think he believed he redeemed them out of Ireland. And so so it's interesting because he was a gentle man from all we know. But Easter was, again, one of those holidays. It was brought over, and we adapted it. We incorporated. Wait, what's the Borg thing? You will be assimilated.
Assimilated. And resistance is futile.
Yes, resistance is futile. And it was back then. Philip says he was just joking. He doesn't know that much about St. Patrick. Just that he's special for Ireland. Yeah, and that's what I never understood the whole snake thing until I looked into it years ago now. But it's like
there's a great mini series called Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes,
Robert
Powell back in the 70s.
Fantastic as Jesus, and he had obviously blue eyes. But I noticed if you ever watch that series, and it's fantastic. I'm still mesmerized when I watch it now. He doesn't blink ever. He doesn't blink.
Oh, I see. Now I didn't notice that.
He doesn't blink. He literally he never does. And literally, when I've watched a lot of films, like even The Passion of Christ, which was hard to stomach in lots of ways, but
sure,
I still prefer Jesus of Nazareth because it is such a great story. And when you see him, you know what happens.
One thing about if I were to compare the Jesus of Nazareth with Robert Powell and the Passion of the Christ with James Caviezel.
Yeah.
The thing I like is both of them had gritty realism about them. And I like that. As a matter of fact, when I was in theater work way back in my college days, we used for costuming and for set design. And we were doing it was a Bible college. We were doing the play, The Big Fisherman, all about Peter. And so all the sets, all the backdrops, all the costuming, I had this photo book I had picked up of Robert Powell's Jesus of Nazareth. And I said, this is our source book. And we used that book to design the costuming that people wore. So it did just look like fake beards and bathrobes and bed sheets.
Yeah.
And we dirtied things up a bit and we made them look worn, and the color schemes and all of that. So, but the Passion of the Christ, I always had this thing, since we're talking about Easter, about the very frail and limp-wristed. I don't use that as a euphemism for being gay, which people use. I don't use it that way in this context. But the limp-wristed, the very almost effeminate, frail-looking Christ.
Yes.
And this discussion came up a while back about some artwork I was doing for a client. And he said he wanted a more muscular Christ. And I said, but not muscle bound. He wasn't a weightlifter. I said, but there's a thing you have to remember about Jesus, Yeshua, if you will. Yeshua, I always liked it when I could say Yeshua Bar Yosef, Joshua, the son of Joseph, which was what his Hebrew name would have been. And Jesus, just the Latinized version of Joshua. And I said, Jesus, you got to remember about Jesus. For 30 years of his life, he was a manual laborer. He was and it's not like now. You weren't a contractor. He didn't have the big decked out chariot, where he'd sit and have a smoke while his workers worked. He was a manual laborer. And they found that the Koine Greek word for carpenter, which we always heard Joseph was and Jesus was a carpenter, that word is synonymous in the Koine Greek for stonemason. And
Yeah.
so they believed that he was not only a carpenter, he was a stonemason. He was like an all-around builder, like a contractor. This is why I know I'm going off on a rabbit trail here. I'll pull us back.
We'll get back there.
But I always bristled at the notion. I remember Jesse Jackson, who ran for president, all that, big leader of the Black movement. And he had made a statement one year about saying, we had to do this for the poor because at Christmas, because Mary and Joseph were poor. They were impoverished. They couldn't find a place to stay. And I said, whoa, dude, you're a reverend and you don't know any better than that? Because Joseph, I don't think Joseph was a poor man. Why were they looking for a place to stay? So it was census time, according to the passage. And there wasn't you couldn't go on Kayak or Expedia.com and set up your rooms ahead of time. They traveled to the town and they go there and the town's packed and there's nowhere to stay. They didn't have a place to stay because they were poor and impoverished. He probably had a bag full of money. They couldn't find a place to stay. So that's one of my pet peeves. And then the other one is you got to remember Jesus grew up. Remember, even in Nazareth, when he was preaching during his ministry in Nazareth, they said, hey, ain't that the carpenter's kid? You're not the Messiah. You're the carpenter's kid.
Yeah.
They recognized him. He was a carpenter for 30 years and a stonemason. So the guy was probably not big and brawny like I must pump you up. He was probably, though, probably not very frail and probably, muscular enough to have done his job.
And he probably very much didn't have blue eyes, and
he was Hebrew.
But I think, Robert, it's always on at Easter time, along with Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments.
Yes, all my favorites.
Carry on films and stuff like that. So it's quite a popular thing. But I think when you watch that, it still grips me, the crucifixion scene, and that's something that I think that stayed with me throughout Easter. And I was Christian Church of England, although I have my foot in paganism and Wiccan and all kinds of stuff. I was Christian Church of England, so I have that kind of background of history. And
that's your whole history.
It was, and it's like, so to know that we actually did this to human beings, we actually crucified human beings, and what a terrible way to die. You wouldn't die straight away. Well, if you were lucky and had a heart attack or something, but you didn't die straight away. It would take you hours to die.
Well, they say that crucifixion was more a death by suffocation than it was by whipping and having nails. You could have a spike driven through your wrist, which is probably where it was, not the palm of the hand. It was the wrist. You'd rip out between your finger with your body weight, through the wrist, through the feet. Those aren't things that would kill you necessarily.
No.
What killed you was they would take, I did a big study a long time ago on Roman crucifixion, and they would take, they'd nail the hands or the wrists to the crossbeam, and the crossbeam was separate, and they would hoist the crossbeam up with the person hanging on it and drop it into place on the upright, which usually had the effect of tearing the shoulders out of joint.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't support themselves without extreme pain. Then they would take the knees and push the knees up toward the chest and nail the feet in.
Yeah.
So it compressed the diaphragm. And the purpose for this was to make it a torturous death, because the only way they could breathe was to lift up on those shoulders that were out of joint and push up on those bent knees so they could take a breath. And so what did they do? Remember I don't know if you know this, but you probably do. You're pretty smart. What they did at the end, when they said, okay, this guy suffered enough, it's time, they would go by with a big club and they would break their legs.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? So they could not push up to breathe anymore. And they would die of suffocation. And in Jesus' case, it said they didn't break his legs because they saw he was already dead. And so which was, as the Bible will tell you, to fulfill the prophecy that none of his bones would be broken, and so on. So,
But I mean, obviously, obviously, you've got the story that they then speared him, right, as well.
Yep.
But for me, it's like what always haunted me, and I have to say, like, it's a terrible story, but the amount of hate that his own people, his own kin, as in, like, you know, had for him. How can you imagine the energy of walking through that crowd with carrying a cross that it's too heavy for you. You've been whipped. You have the crown of thorns on, which would be incredibly painful, and yet the energy is all, you know, until I think the crowd actually changed their mind as time went on. What kind of human beings were we to even think of it? I mean,
and how close could we be to that today?
Like, because of being different, you know, because obviously, like, you can either save Barabbas or you can.
And Pilate presented him, this innocent guy. I find no fault in him.
And also, you know, he's just the Son of God. And actually, I actually thought Jesus came. He's a royal bloodline. He came through a royal bloodline anyway.
The line of David, yeah,
exactly. So, but for him. Like, you know, as I said, that's the story we're shown. That's the story we're told. But it's like he's just at that point, he's just a man who knows what's going to happen. He knows how it's going to end, but he's just human, and he's going to feel that. And I still find that when I watch, you know, both stories, the Passion of Christ and Jesus of Nazareth, you actually think, God, human beings are terrible.
Yes.
That we enjoy to watch people suffer.
It's interesting, and I know we're talking about Ostara and the beginnings of Easter as it was adopted by the church, but I got to talk about this too. It was interesting. I always wondered, how could it be that on Sunday, when Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem riding the foal of a donkey, and everybody's throwing down the palm fronds and yelling, "Hosanna to the King." Yes. I said, what was it that 5 days later had all the people turning on him? Crucify him, they yell. And I did a little study into that. And I found that Palm Sunday, when he came riding in on the donkey, what were the people primed for at that point? They wanted to be out from under Roman oppression.
Yeah, say no more.
And they're hailing back to the days of Judas Maccabeus and the Maccabean revolt over 100 years earlier, where they drove the Greeks out of the temple and held them out, and they got help from Rome, and Rome eventually just kind of went, "Hey, we're going to take over." And so when they're waving the palm frond was actually a symbol of the Maccabean family. Which was a symbol of the Maccabean revolt against their oppressors. So when they're seeing Jesus ride into town, a historical key for you, when they're waving the palm frond, that's not to go, "Oh, Jesus, you're a king." That was to say, in the way that Judas Maccabeus did it, we've got his symbol right here. We're going to throw it at your feet. You're going to be the king. You're the Messiah that's going to deliver us from the oppression of Rome. It was all pure political. What happens in politics when your candidate disappoints you? I'm going to vote for the other guy. And I think that's basically what happened, because throughout the week, he had his ministry points. He cleared the temple and all of that. And he held people out for 3 days of that week when he cleared the temple. Again, no weak man. And the people asked him, you know, are you going to deliver us from Rome? Pretty much. And I'm paraphrasing all this in here. And he said, "My kingdom's in your heart."
That's right.
And they were like,
you don't need to go to a place of worship to pray to me, to listen to me. And I think that's something that I took from a very young age, was that message that I didn't need to go into a building where you have to, you know, I mean, I remember going to Sunday school when I was a child, and the vicar at the time used to bring out the massive Bible and bang it down, and
Yes.
hellfire and all this kind of stuff. But I also think as well, Mary Magdalene, if you look at the point that she was his wife,
I believe she was,
and she was pregnant with his child, she watched the man that she loved and married, if we look at it from that point of view, be basically crucified. And then she had to, and his own mother had to watch it. And I think, and what I like about the Robert Powell version, and I come back to this because it always reminds me of Easter, is that he showed such depth of emotion and compassion, almost like he was scared. He knew. And to have your closest friend, one of your closest friends, betray you, right?
Yes.
The 30 pieces of silver. How many of our best friends or people that we consider friends betray us? And how much do they get out of it? It doesn't matter whether it's they got money or they got someone else, whatever. We've all been betrayed by people that we trusted. We've all been betrayed by people that we took into our circle and broke bread with, and and I think that not only does the whole Easter story show to me betrayal and sacrifice, and also just incredible horror of what human beings can do to another.
Yes.
So I think that this is like, it's really important to, when we're talking about Easter, we remember the origins of why it's now called Easter, which is the pagan. And then also remember that although he did, what's the word? Show us that we didn't die and that we live on.
Yep.
It is also a story about suffering, great suffering.
Yes. And by the way, thank you, Uncle Dave. Oh. He'd need more than 30 pieces of silver to betray me.
I can hear him doing his pirate voice as he actually said that.
Oh, 30 pieces of silver. That's
my love.
Let's go for 60. There's an interesting, and I got to mention this too. Have you heard of the book of Judas?
Yes.
The Gospel of Judas. Now, remember, folks, we got 4 Gospels in the Bible that are basically all rooted in one of them. Mark was they think historically was the original gospel, and everything kind of comes out of that, but it all has different perspectives. And I need to make one more side point before I get into my side point, is that the idea that people say the Bible's not accurate because, like the Gospels, they all have different stories. Well, I think that's the beauty of it. If everybody said the same exact thing in the Bible stories, what would be the criticism? They obviously were all told what to say. This is the line. And they all had their own perspectives as they saw it from their points of view. Now, the book of Judas is one of those 70 Gospels that have been found and discovered, that some of them date back only to the, like the 400s or the 500s or something like that. But of course, the explanation is they could be copies of the original. But wasn't the Gospel of Judas a totally different telling of the betrayal of Jesus? That it was actually Judas that was, and again, perspective, Judas was the man who was the closest friend of Jesus.
He was.
Yeah. And when Jesus took him aside before the Last Supper and said, I'm going to ask you to do something. And I need you to betray me in order to fulfill the prophecy. And that Judas bristled at this notion and refused to do it. And Jesus said, if you don't do this thing, then you don't understand. He says, I brought you aside because you understand the greater mysteries. And this is where you start going into the mystery religions behind Jesus, the mystery spirituality. He says, you above all the rest understand the mysteries, and you must understand this. And so, according to the book of Judas, he did this very begrudgingly. And now you look at the Gospels that still exist, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I don't remember which one it is, probably Luke, because he's the historian, maybe somebody else, but Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me. And, well, who is it, Lord? Is it me? Is it me? They're all saying, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, the one who dips his bread into the sauce with me at the same time is the one. And he goes to dip his bread, and Judas dips at the same time, obviously not paying attention. And what did Jesus say in the gospel? He looks at him and he says, that thing that you are appointed to do, it's time to do it. Go do that thing I've appointed you to do. And so he took off. And then what happens? He obviously right away can't live with himself after that, and he commits suicide. And or as one version says, one gospel says, he tripped and fell on a cliffy rocky cliff face, and his guts split open and he died. The other one says he hung himself. So which version was it? Two different versions of the same event. I think
it's the popular version is that he hung himself, isn't it? That's
yes.
the most popular one. And I also think that what happened, I mean, let's play hypothetical here. If Judas had refused to do it, which one would have taken over and done it? Because in the end, they were all terrified to even say, I think it was like, was it Peter that actually said, I don't know him, or when they asked,
he denied him 3 times, he said.
Because at the end of the day, human beings are scared. And you suddenly have those kind of people coming after you, fear takes over.
I don't blame Peter at that time.
Friendship goes out there because you're terrified. And it takes so in a way, Judas was probably the bravest out of all of them, and he gets such a bad rap, as does Mary Magdalene, because obviously her part of the Bible was taken out. No one really knows much about her version of it, apart from the fact that
they believe that she is, according to the Gospel of, I think it's Mattathias, one of these other 70 Gospels that were lost for centuries. Gospel of Mattathias, Mary Magdalene is referred to as Miriamne, and Miriamne meaning, there was some meaning to, and I don't know if this is the exact translation of the word, but she was known as the great teacher, the one who Jesus left to teach in his place, his wife. She was highly honored. And this might be where the veneration of Mary came from in its initial roots, but then the church fathers in the Roman Catholic Church, the literalist Orthodox Church, what did they do? They diminished the role of Mary. They made her a prostitute. The Bible, by the way, folks, the Bible nowhere says that Mary was a prostitute. Nowhere. That came from the early church fathers. It was a way to denigrate the memory of the woman and diminish her role. And which tells you one thing. Even guys that are committed, supposedly, to the promulgation of the truth of the gospel, they were willing to lie and make shit up in order to promote the policies of the church. And so you got to think about that too.
And the other thing I liked about it, because having a spiritualist side, and also a believing of life after death, reincarnation, the fact that he died and rose again shows that, it shows us that there is no end to life. There is no end. There is just part of the journey. We are on a journey, and this is just part of it. We're down here because before he did that, before that happened to him, I don't know if they actually wrote about reincarnation in any other way, or life after death, rebirth. But I think, I was looking about the shroud, the tale of the shroud.
Yes.
Which
is an intriguing document.
They also just did I think they did it in the Vatican, where they bring around the cloth that wiped Jesus' face, and they show
Sudarium.
They show it to everybody. And you actually wonder, because let's be honest, the Catholic Church has made so many porky pies out of so many things. They say it's absolute gospel when it's not. But I do think it shows us that from other parts of religions that we've got, other, they've always believed in life after death, rebirth, reincarnation. And here it is right at Easter showing us that this is just part of the journey. It's not the end. It's not the final destination.
And that wraps it right back into Ostara, is that this was a perfect merging of Christianity and pagan religion. Look, you already celebrate fertility. You already celebrate new life. You already celebrate resurrection. And by the way, in the Jewish way of thinking, back in the first century, there was no resurrection. That was a foreign concept to them. Not the resurrection in the afterlife, resurrection of the physical body.
Yeah.
It was foreign. I would also like to know, by the way, speaking of that, remember the passage says that when Jesus died on the cross, it is finished, he says, and bows his head into your hands, I commit my spirit. And he dies. It says, and all the tombs around Jerusalem were opened, and the dead came forward and ministered to the living. Now, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Was that a literal event? I don't see anything in history being written about that event. Did that actually happen? Were they speaking in metaphor? They didn't warn us and say, now I'm going to give you a little story here, a metaphor, the graves were open and everybody prophesied, but not really. So you get that event that takes place.
And I think it was Mary Magdalene that saw him first when he rose. His wife, obviously, and obviously then her progress. As we know, they believe that she was pregnant. Had a daughter called, I believe, Sarah. That's how it's supposed to have passed on the church. But the thing is, when we talk about Easter, and people just think it's about bunnies and chocolate and what's going on, it's not. It's so much more than that. It's our history. It's our history from Babylon. It goes all the way back to Babylon because, as I said to you earlier on, we were talking about it. The goddess, is it? Say the name for me again.
Ishtar.
Ishtar, Babylon. So it goes back. Our Easter holidays, the whole.
Easter. I said
it's
Ishtar.
all the way back.
Now hold that thought. We got to go out for the radio audience. Radio audience, thank you for being here. We're going to see you, but join us in the chat room over on the YouTube channel. And so for now, radio audience, live long and prosper. Everybody sit tight. And welcome back, folks. We're over in the YouTube channel exclusively now. We are off the radio station, so we can continue this conversation for a little bit. And good points. Andy was wending on. That's good. Wendy was ending on. And if you have more to say on that, you can pick that up, or we'll just keep rolling. I
mean, I feel like it's Halloween with my black cat here, literally,
yes,
stealing the show. But it's where was my point? What I mean is when you look back, it's people just think it's why do we have Easter? Well, it's about when Jesus died. Well, where do bunnies and rabbits come from?
How did that all get involved? Yeah,
and now we know. Now we know that it was always there. It was always there in the beginning, and it goes all the way back. And unfortunately, like a lot of things in life, it gets pushed on,
convoluted. Yep.
Which is why the pagans and Wiccans feel like they've had a disservice done to them.
Right.
Why they have,
Yes.
But however, for me, if I said to you, what was your earliest memory of Easter? What do you remember about it when you were
I think the earliest I remember Easter was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. No, I wasn't Ukrainian. You know me, a little Welsh Scottish boy. being raised by my stepfather at the time, who was Ukrainian. And we went to the Ukrainian church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Minneapolis. And it was always, I remember there was always this feeling of reverence when I went there. Because you'd walk into the sanctuary, and I always remember it being a little dark, but candle lit and low lights and statuary and very solemn, but not in a scary way. It was solemn for a little kid. I mean, I remember it leaving me with that feeling of, without understanding who God was or what God was all about when I was a little kid, I remember it feeling holy and starting to understand, or just barely able to grasp that concept. And so that's my earliest recollections of Easter were the Pascha bread and walking into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. How about you?
Did your family, like, would your mom leave something out for you? Did you celebrate
Yeah,
it?
we always had Easter baskets.
Right.
So it
And
was
what about
always
the eggs? Because we don't really do that over here. Well, we didn't for many years, like Easter egg hunt, where you go looking for the eggs. Did you do that?
Easter egg hunts came up much later. It was always something that we had to take the little kids to. There's always an Easter egg hunt here in our town. I know my kids, very interesting. I had hundreds and hundreds of kids in these towns around here that all gather for this. My kids, in 2 years, well, not consecutive years, but 2 of my kids won bicycles at the bicycle giveaway at the egg hunt. And it's like, wow, what's the odds of that? So, but yeah. And is it ever a religious thing? No. Easter in the West has become, for the unchurched, or those who, that sounds too negative, for those who just don't go to church, who aren't Christian, or Easter is not a religious holiday. It's not something that they do.
But I think we've lost that because, there is not many days. I mean, there's not many days a year that family gets together, really. I mean, apart from the odd party and maybe time, it was always a time that, when I was growing up, family would spend Easter Sunday together. And, I remember and have great memories of my family doing a roast dinner and mum making the best for us and having the little Easter baskets beside the bed. And like the Easter bunny's going to come. So that's the other thing that's kind of really interesting. The Easter bunny is the one that brings you your eggs, right? Here is this fertility. Where did that come from? Who said it was the Easter bunny that was going to bring the eggs?
I don't know. It does come out of I think the whole hair connection to Ostara. And it's just morphed over the years. So I think it's somebody brought that up, and it's relatively a more recent twist on the holiday. That's only in the 20th century that started. So to having an Easter bunny and so on. I think it's because people always did the symbol of the rabbit and so on. I wonder, is there an Easter Krampus? I'm curious to know.
Well, on May Day, on the 1st of May, obviously that's another pagan holiday. We have obviously the maypoles, and you've got the red and white colours of the strings that go in, and obviously it's a phallic symbol for fertility.
Sure.
And I, I've always said it was the May Queen. It was not as nice, and that's something we can look at a further time. It wasn't as nice as, there's always sacrifice. There's always some kind of ritual with all of this.
Burning them in the wicker man.
Exactly. Well, with Easter, it's kind of like you thought it was the one. If you look at the pagan side, it's the one holiday which is nice. It's got bunny rabbits and chocolate. But then, you do remember the other side to it. So what does Easter show us? It's a time of spring, fertility, new beginnings, new starts, to sowing the seeds of the future that you so want to come to fruition come late September, October. It's a time of being thankful, of being blessed, of being gratitude. It's a time of maybe starting a family or with the fertility, because that was very important. You had to have children to keep everything going. But it's also a time of
crops.
Yeah, it's also a time of, death, rebirth, and I would say reincarnation. It's such a massive holiday, and yet all of us will just walk around this weekend and go, we barely say Happy Easter to each other. We won't even think about anything else. We just look at the egg. There's a huge side to Easter, which is why we felt we should cover it.
Yes. And I've noticed that too. I don't see people don't wander around. I get Happy Halloween a lot.
Yes.
In October, I get Merry Christmas all the time, or season's greetings, however people want to water that down or express it. I don't really get people saying Happy Easter. You were talking about Easter cards. I don't get Easter cards. I barely even get Happy Easter from people.
I
know. Because, now you go, when I was a kid, Easter, there was nothing open.
No.
You couldn't go anywhere to have anything open. There was no restaurants open, maybe the Chinese restaurants, but that was about it. And now it's just another day. It's just another Sunday. And
that's sad, isn't it? Because I was talking to a few people this week and they were going, oh yeah, Easter's nothing, and yet you have, is it Friday? You have 4 days, because you have Bank Holiday Monday as well.
What kind of Monday would you call it?
We have Good Friday, and then we have Easter Saturday, Easter Sunday, and then we have Bank Holiday Monday. So we have another day off on the Monday.
There might be a bank holiday on Monday after Easter here. I don't always remember that if we have one or not. We don't have Boxing Day, but we have people call a different thing at Christmas, after Christmas. We don't have, by the way, somebody asked Anita Palmer, why is about May Day? May Day, there's a couple of different meanings for that. And one of them is, the whole maypole and things like that, and dancing and fertility and all of that stuff. And that's when young women come and young women come and they put streamers on my flagpole and they go around in circles and dance.
And obviously, over here, we have the Morris dancers as well.
Right.
And
Morris dancers.
Thomas as well. And
but May Day, wasn't that always a labor kind of a day? International Labor Day?
Well, it's a day off. But the reason why we celebrate it is because it was a very important calendar day. It was May Day. Right. It was May Queen. And ladies could actually go and pick a fella from the village or forest and
shag him like a bunny
and produce, it was all about, the women were very much in control on that day, and it was all about the fertility gods as well. So that's something we can look at nearer the time. But it's exciting when you look back to here we are in 2023 and we're talking about events that started back in Babylon.
Right.
And are now incorporated in present day, but have been watered down to fit greeting cards, chocolate makers, shops. So Christmas has just happened, and there's your Easter eggs. They're already out. It's a shame that we've lost the real meaning of Easter.
Yes. Yeah, it is. So, Dave, if only you knew.
What's that?
So, I think he's trying to be insulting. He always tries to offend me because he thinks he can. He can't. So,
and he's good at
that. He's being jokey over there.
But I really hope that everybody has a very happy and blessed Easter, whatever.
Yes.
Whatever you do, however you celebrate it. We just wanted to pick a mix tonight and go a bit of this, bit of that. And actually go, when you're actually celebrating Easter this weekend, and you might get together with family, or you might just have a movie you're watching or time on your own, maybe we've actually enlightened you to know what the real story of Easter is about. Because obviously he wasn't crucified on different days of that
Right.
time. It wasn't May the 7th, April the 7th, March the 30th. You know, do we actually know when he was crucified directly?
It was Passover. It was that Saturday, in between the Friday he was crucified and the Sunday he resurrected. Saturday was Passover. So I think that they probably could nail it down to what date in that year. What year did Jesus actually die? Nobody's really sure, but they can pinpoint it, to within I think 5 or 6 years of Pilate no longer being the procurator of Judea, and so they can get it pretty close, and so it was definitely on Passover. And
when I went to Rome and I went to the Vatican and I actually went to St. Peter's Square, I hadn't, they obviously told us lots of things about it, but obviously he was crucified upside down, Peter, and because he said, you cannot kill me in the same way as my Lord, and so they said, right, well, we'll crucify you upside down. And I thought that was an amazing, astounding. I mean, that must have been, I can't even, the upside down cross, really, if you think about it, because when Jesus was crucified, it was on a cross. But if you're actually crucifying someone upside down, that is an upside, cross, which has very different meanings.
Or they thought it might have been in an X form.
That's right, in an X. So, have you ever been to the Vatican?
I have never been to the Vatican.
When you go there, they've got this, it's kind of like there's the building and then you've got these big arms and they call it it makes you, it's massive and it makes you feel like the church is welcoming you into the arms. And they've got a Egyptian symbol and it's like a needle or whatever they call it, and they put a cross on the top of it, so it's like we conquered it. It's a very interesting place, and when you first go in, they have the I've forgotten the famous name, forgive me, the statue of Mary holding Jesus,
the Madonna.
And literally, remember years ago, it was somebody tried to shoot it, and it broke up, and everybody grabbed a piece of this, and the church said, "Could everybody please send bits of it back? We're not going to judge, but we want to put it back together." When you actually see that, just as you go in the Vatican, it's there on the right-hand side. It is absolutely amazing to see that, and James is absolutely right. The Vatican,
James is right.
It isn't what you seem. They've got so many paraphernalia about pagan and occult stuff in there as well that they don't talk about. Yeah. I'd love to get into those archives.
I would. Somebody said, "Wouldn't you like a day in the archives?" I said, "No, I would like a month in the archives."
Yeah, me too.
So that would be interesting. I don't even know what I would look for first, but there's a lot of mysterious stuff stashed away in there.
It's a lot.
I think the Vatican Library has got to be almost like the old Library of Alexandria.
Well, you can't. I mean, when you go, you obviously not allowed to go in there, but it's like I always remember they've got this great statue of a woman, and she's got a big thorn coming out of her toe, and the globe is underneath, and it's pointing into England, and that's because England was the bane of the Catholic Church because we Protestant via Henry VIII.
Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, he did do something for us. But it's an interesting place. If you ever, I think you'd love it. I think you'd get
I'd love it.
From it, a lot from it.
There's obvious things I want to see. I want to see the Sistine Chapel. I want to see Michelangelo's work. I would love to see that. There are things I'd like to see there. I'm not Catholic, but I think at the core somewhere there's something that's genuine about the church, even though I think the church gets a bad rap for all the atrocities it's committed over the years.
It's a beautiful place, but I think it's also there's a lot of propaganda
Yeah.
And when you actually go to their museum, the Vatican Museum, you actually realize that they made they joined the English with actually, oh, it's not tied down, we'll take that back, thank you very much. They have a lot of artifacts. They have a lot of Egyptian artifacts when you go in there. Some of it absolutely astounding. I actually really enjoy, I mean, I saw the Sistine Chapel. It is stunning, I have to say. It's beautiful. But it wasn't as astounding as I really hoped it to be. What I found more interesting for me was the museum and the things they have their hands on. And I think that when you go there, everyone talks about seeing the Sistine Chapel because it is this. And I did sneak a photograph with a phone, very much like this. And I actually have a picture of the Sistine Chapel that I wasn't supposed to take.
I think the Vatican doesn't have hold a big draw for me.
No.
Like I say, I'm, certain things I could see, but there's other things in Italy and Rome I'd like to see. I'd rather see the Forum than the Vatican. If I had to choose, I'd rather see the Colosseum than the Vatican.
Yeah.
I watched somebody's video that they put up where it was a long video, but they had their camera up and they walked all the way around the inside of the Colosseum and all the hallways and all of that stuff and the things that went up to the seats, the what do you call it? It wasn't a ramp. It was just the outdoor path that went around the inside of the Colosseum where you'd go find your seat or you'd look out there and there's the arena. And they went downstairs to see the old. That was fascinating. I would love to see that.
The first time I saw the Colosseum, it was really dirty from the outside. They don't take care of it everywhere. It was really dirty. And when you go in, there are cats everywhere. And they're cats everywhere. And
sure,
the Italians don't tend to take care of their animals too well. And
nice.
A lot of them push their cats out on the street. But
have you ever? I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
No, I was just going to say, when I went, I was really lucky. I could actually walk on a bridge, which took me right in the middle of the arena.
Yes.
And I think they stopped you doing that now. I think you can't do that.
Oh.
But I have to say, I remember, this is before Maximus, Gladiator came out. I actually remember being there thinking, what a terrifying sound that would have been.
Oh.
Hearing the crowd baying for you.
Yeah. Well, don't they have a floor that's put in on the arena now that goes about halfway across the Colosseum in a straight line? And so you can walk out there.
They don't always let you use it. And I wasn't allowed to go down and see the gladiator side of things as well.
Right.
But I think they did put a cross up to say thank you. And I'm so sorry for all of you that gave their lives and took basically sacrificed. So there's some sort of,
I saw, excuse me, somebody yesterday or the day before, just some random post. I saw somebody talking down the persecution of Christians. That Christians were never fed to the lions. It's just a fable that Nero didn't do that. They were just part of the crowd. It wasn't like a persecution of the Christians. This person was downing he said Christians always need to have persecution in their history in order to think that they're relevant. And I disagreed with him, but I got to look that up historically now and find out, were Christians per se targeted specifically and fed to the lions? Or was it part of something else that was going on? And because I'd heard stories they were fed to the lions, that they were put in the gladiatorial rings, that they were waxed up by Nero and lit on fire as torchlight for his celebration. I mean, you got to think of the mentality of people back then too.
Yeah.
Of course, if the emperor ordered it, you had to do it. But who would feel comfortable going to a banquet and a party at Caesar's house when he's burning humans for torchlight? That's pretty macabre shit when you think about it.
Interesting with the up and the down symbols.
Yeah.
I didn't know that as a kid either. It was obviously from Roman times. He lives, he doesn't live, right? And can you imagine your whole life is on a tone of what the mob, the crowd wanted, and whether, you know, what a terrible way. So when we look back at these times where Jesus was obviously alive, and, you know, he was there as well, and he traveled all the way across
yes,
Europe in his time. I just look back and I think, you know, when we all sit down and we look back at our holidays, not so much Christmas, because that's always around the nice time of things. In some ways, Easter is the macabre time. Just my thought.
Very interesting. You mentioned Gladiator games. Did you know that Ridley Scott is doing a sequel to Gladiator?
I heard rumors, but is this with Russell Crowe?
Not with Russell Crowe. And now that doesn't mean he won't make an appearance in there, because he died at the end of the last movie. I heard that the movie is picking up with the young boy. What was his name? Gaius? Lucius. They're picking up with that character in history and following him as a man. Mm-hmm. And I just looked it up as I was thinking about it. They said Paul Mescal was the first name attached as the lead role, and now it's being reported that the acclaimed character actor Barry Keoghan, Keoghan, as well as Denzel Washington, are in the talks to join in the cast of Gladiator 2. So that could be very interesting.
I don't think you can really call it Gladiator 2, can you? Because the real Gladiator was very much about one man's journey.
Yes.
To me, it's like, you know, Russell Crowe was that whole story. And yes, you can't bring him back. Well, you could a flashback, I suppose, of him, can't you?
Yeah.
But I remember seeing what's his name? Marcus Aurelius, his bust out there as well.
Richard Harris, yeah.
Really weird, you know, because obviously Richard Harris looked very different, but Marcus Aurelius had curly hair, and he did. He was very respected, and he was one of the last. I think he was one of the last.
Well, we did for a long time on Intrepid Radio. We were doing the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. Reading basically his diaries, his thoughts, and his meditations. Good stuff. And Uncle Dave's right. Nero was insane. That guy, you look at statuary of him, you look at some of the modern day, what do they call it? The forensic rebuilding of his face and the way he would have looked. That guy looked he looked like your typical bar thug. And probably not an overly smart one. I don't know how smart the man was acclaimed to be, but yeah, he kind of lost it at the end there, didn't he?
Isn't there talk that he's supposed to be the devil incarnate?
Nero? I don't think he was.
He did some terrible things.
It's interesting. I just saw a little clip of a video today, and it looked interesting. There's a bunch of guys sitting in a parlor in the late 1800s, old professors, and they were talking. And and it started off, and it intrigued me because he was talking about Satan. And I thought, oh, what is this? And so I watched it, and there were some pretty well-known actors in these parts, but it was a true story about a guy that I have no idea what his name was, a professor, a theologian, and he was putting forward in the late 1800s the idea that Satan isn't trying to make humanity immoral. He says, Satan is not necessarily immoral. And all the other guys are bristling. Oh, how can you say that, Professor? Blah, blah, blah. And he says, no, he's not here to promote immorality. He says he's here to distract people from Jesus and to distract people's attention. And that can be done. Even the Bible says Satan can appear as an angel of light.
Yes, he can.
So he can offer some very tantalizing things, not just tantalizing in let's say, you think sexual or perverted or things that draw people's attention. He can do that with good things too. So he said Satan is, or Lucifer, or whoever you want to call him, his point he was making. And I thought about that for a few minutes and I went, he's probably right. We've said this in other ways before, but Satan, if you want to call him that, probably is not presenting, I am evil, come to me, evil, follow me. That's not what Satan is about. And he could be as moral as the next guy. Remember? He was an angel.
Do we know what Satan's view was, or Lucifer's view on the crucifixion?
I don't think there was anything ever written, at least in scripture, about it.
Point. Why would there be nothing from the one person who didn't want Jesus to succeed, who didn't want people to follow him? Why is there no quote or written down? Because you think because Jesus achieved what he wanted to achieve, which was, to show us all and be the way. And that's exactly what apparently Satan and Lucifer or whatever wouldn't have wanted. So I've always wanted to know that. What did he think of the crucifixion?
I know one of the hints I suppose you could get at is the Genesis prophecy in the book of Genesis, when God is condemning the serpent character, Nakosh. And he said, you will bite his heel, but he will return and crush your head. And even rabbinic scholars who don't necessarily believe Jesus was the Messiah, they believe that they will attest to that being the first prophecy, messianic prophecy in the Bible, was the book of Genesis, the Garden of Eden story. So is this a scene where Satan knew? Was Satan like, ha, we have the Son of God now, he's being crucified? No, he probably already knew, is the point. If he had trafficked in the courts of heaven and knew God and was once the archangel that was the protector of the glory and beauty of God, he had some idea about how things worked. And I would think the thing he would probably have tried to done was thwart the crucifixion, thwart the sacrifice of the Son of God, so it would never happen. There's that possibility. I'm just speculating. I'm talking like a storybook version of it. But I would think that would have to be the thing that Satan would have most tried to do, would prevent the crucifixion prevent the death.
Didn't the Passion of Christ have him, though? In when you saw him in a hood or whatever, and he had I'm sure he was in the Passion of Christ. They actually had him. He was in the crowd.
Well, there was some criticism of Mel Gibson, because when Satan appeared to Jesus in the wilderness, turn that stone to bread and eat it, and and all he's tempting him. He looked like Obama, who was the president at the time.
Yeah.
And so, or was he? Yeah, in the Passion, he was. And so you look at that and you go, wait a minute, wait a minute. Was that deliberate on the part of Mel Gibson?
Yeah.
Because we know he's conservative. But was he in the crowd? Yeah, they showed him in the crowd. They showed Satan a couple of times. So
it was such a gory film. I mean, obviously, when they flayed him, obviously they used the little gadgets that
the cat of nine tails, or
imagine
a version of it.
Pain.
Well, the crucifixion, what we know about Roman crucifixion, and I don't know if you remember this, Wendy. I'm sure you do. I'm going to remind you of it. A few years ago, I illustrated a book for a guy that wrote the Passion. I don't think he called it the Passion of the Christ, but the Passion of the Lamb or something like that. And it was his version of the crucifixion. He was digging deep into not just his Roman Catholicism, but into history about what Roman crucifixion was really all about and what it meant. And now it's funny. I never read the book because I never saw the final version. I don't know if he's published it yet, but I did like 40 color illustrations for this book for him back 5-6 years ago. And the last I had heard, he was still about a year ago. I did another illustration. He said, "I need you to add an illustration." And it's not a never-ending project. It's just one he hasn't felt perfected yet to publish. But one of the things he talked about was the type of whip that was used.
Yeah.
And it would have been probably a 3-stranded leather strands with little chunks of metal on the end. They were either little balls on the end of metal, or they were chunks of broken metal, and that they were laced into the thongs, and they would whip with that, and it would have it would just literally rip the skin open. What did the customs say in the day? And I think it's in the biblical account that they whipped Jesus 39 times, but they had a saying. They said 40 save 1, because 40 was meant to be certain death. So they whipped him 39 times with this thing. And it's interesting because this author, I know he based a lot of his study on not just history, but he used the Shroud of Turin. He believed the Shroud of Turin was the burial cloth of the Jesus Christ. And he goes into a lot of that in his book. But it shows the wounds on the blood stains, and what you see on that shroud all have this triplet effect to them, meaning it had the ball, the triple ball on the end of the thong that would whip and rip the skin open that way, and you'd see these triplets of wounds.
It's nice, isn't it? There's someone out there thinking, do you know, lads, let's just make a new one, and this one's going to have little bits of metal in it, so we can just like flay them. It amazes me that people think up these ways, and what a terrible way to go.
I know, a terrible way to go. Now, it's interesting, by the way, on the Shroud of Turin. I have a man, I can call him my friend. We're not like buddy, but I've known him for 15 years or so, Barry Schwartz. And he was the photographer that went in with the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, JPL, back in the late 70s. They were invited in to photograph the shroud and do some examination of the shroud. And he was a photographer, and he was brought along with JPL. And he said, the first thing I could tell you, he says, I thought, hey, and he's a Jewish guy. And he says, hey, Shroud of Turin, the Shroud of Jesus. He says, free trip to Italy. I'm going. And so he went along, and he says, one thing that struck me, he says, I wasn't in there for 7 minutes, and I could have told you this is not a fake image. And he went about and he did all his photography work, and he explained how the image on the shroud, how it can't be pigment. It's not painted. He says pigment needs, now I'm making up the numbers because I don't remember them exactly, but for paint to appear or pigment to appear on a fiber, it has to be at least 14 microns deep at the minimal to adhere to fabric or fiber. And he said the image on the shroud is about 6 or 7 microns deep. So not even half the amount it takes pigment to adhere to fiber. That was one of the things. And he had all kinds of technical stuff. And he started a website. You can go visit it today, shroud.com.
I will. I'll have a look.
And that's been up there for 30 years, that website, 30 to 35 years. And I've had him on my show a couple of times, and he talks about this. And there's interesting new developments they found with the ability to scan better now than we did even 10 years ago. And they've got images of the shroud where, what else did they find on this body? We all have an image of what the shroud looked like, and the blood stains. But then he finds that they've now found very faint in the imagery on the shroud. You see, and I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but the Jews would use a leather strap and they would wrap it around their forearm for prayers. And they had the olfactory, the little box that they would also wrap around their head. And they have now found all these elements are in the shroud. That
Wow.
this thing has fallen down here or something. Did Jesus wear that to the cross? Was it put on him after the crucifixion? The wrapping of the prayer thing. They also say he's wearing a belt on the shroud. And it shows, you can see images when you look really closely, they point out how this is a belt. And these are the things that are on the belt. And so it made it seem like this was not just an impoverished man. This is somebody who had a little wherewithal that was either put on him afterwards or was he stripped naked on the cross, they say. And so he had on a loincloth and a belt. And they also showed little bits of jewelry. You can see that he had a chain on that had little tiny links of metal. And you could see that this thing, and it had broken or fallen loose, and it's wrapped and it's over here. And so, and the crown of thorns, they said you could see leaves. You can see leaf and berry on this crown of thorns, and which specifically identifies the plant that was used, the thorny plant that was used to make it. And so there's all of this kind of little stuff they keep finding in the shroud, which makes it really intriguing. And of course, he asked the question, what's that?
What happened to the crown?
I don't know. There's all kinds of mythology about it. Did they leave it on him? I would think they would have taken it off at the time of his burial, but according to the shroud, with the image on the shroud, he's still wearing it. Did they dress him? You mentioned the handkerchief, the sudarium that has the old blood stains on it. They discovered the shroud in, I don't know, like what, the 900s, the 1000s, or the 1500s. I don't know when they discovered it, but a couple of centuries later, the sudarium was discovered. And the sudarium, that's a Roman word or a Latin word for basically handkerchief. The sudarium, if you see some of the modern film adaptations now, they've got the costuming right. You see a lot of the Roman soldiers, they had a scarf that they twisted around their neck and tied. It was white or it was red. And they wore that scarf. That was so they always had a handkerchief. They could untie that and use that to wipe sweat or bathe or whatever. And the sudarium that was found, full of bloodstains. And it's dated back 2,000 years. And now what they found about the bloodstains, they match the bloodstains on the shroud. Because doesn't the Bible say when they entombed Jesus, they had wrapped a cloth around his head and his face and then wrapped him in linen. But then it said that they took the facial sudarium off, folded it and laid it beside him, and then wrapped him in linen and as the bedclothes. It's right there in the scripture. So when they take that sudarium and when they put it on his bloody face to sop up the blood and cover his face, then they took that off, and then the shroud is put on him, and there's not as much blood left. So the sudarium has these big blotchy sections of heavy blood, while the shroud has the same shapes, only not as fully covered by the blood. So when you look at that, and they're discovered centuries apart from each other.
That's an interesting point of DNA, though, isn't it? Like they could get DNA from that.
Yes, that would be very interesting.
That would bring up a question of if they haven't already done that, got DNA, which then can be traced to a bloodline. And also, like he was, he's not supposed to have a father, right? Right. God was his father.
God was his dad.
It would be a very interesting DNA bloodline, and that's why why I've always wondered that question. If they have tested on it and they've got a speck of it, they can now do tests on that to find DNA.
That's it. If it survived, if that organic material has enough information in it to trace DNA,
that would be very fair. And we would never know that. They wouldn't tell us that for a while.
You'd never know. So
Wow.
are there descendants from Jesus? I don't think that's. I had a friend say when I once talked about the marriage of Jesus, said I believe he was married to Mary Magdalene. Oh, that's blasphemy. My old seminary buddy told me. I said, what makes that blasphemous?
It's
I
not.
said, doesn't the New Testament in Paul's writings in the book of Hebrews, I think it was, he says that Jesus experienced life in all points just as we do, yet he was a sinless person because he was God.
Yeah.
And so is being married. And I have always attested, you've heard me talk about this before, I'm sure, Wendy,
Yeah.
but the wedding at Cana, the very first miracle of Jesus was when he turned the water into wine at the wedding at Cana. Now, the interesting point about that is that Jesus is a rabbi. He's called rabbi. He's teacher. And in Jewish tradition, back then and even today, you are not considered worth your salt as a rabbi unless you were a married man.
Wow.
So what does Jesus do to launch his ministry? Does he get married? It also says there are interesting things that the Bible story doesn't tell you, but in Jewish tradition, as far back as that goes, even to today, it's the groom's family is responsible for the wine that's provided at weddings. So what happens in the story? You got Jesus is sitting there with his buddies. He's at the wedding. His mom comes to him, and she's like, "Oh my God," no pun intended. She says, "Oh my God, we're out of wine. What are we gonna do?"
I'll
She
fix it.
comes to Jesus. Why she go to him? And why is she the one who's in charge of making sure the wine gets refilled?
Mm-hmm.
She comes to Jesus having some authority at the wedding, and she says, "We're out of wine. What are we going to do?" What does Jesus say? He says, "Calm down, woman.
I
I
got it
got this."
sorted. I got it.
And he sends the servants out to go get a bunch of the big clay pots full of water. Well, if he doesn't have authority there, would the servants just go, "Fuck that. I'm not going to gather water up
Yeah.
on your word. Who are you? You're just a guest." Well, he obviously had the authority to send them out. They come back and he turns the water to wine. And so I happen to think from a lot of circumstantial evidence surrounding that story, which are pretty good clues, that was Jesus' wedding.
Yeah.
And so I believe he was a married man. So
And then his
interesting
daughter,
stuff
like
to me.
I'm sure they said, I read right, that his daughter was called Sarah, and not, that's where they have, blocked us from finding out more about her. But it was a woman that would have carried on the church of
Yeah.
Christ and God.
And the church couldn't abide by that. That's not what they taught.
So what happened to her? She would have been persecuted. She would have been chased. She would have been
I don't know.
never had a moment.
But in
So what happened to her?
the Talpiot tomb in Jerusalem, the Talpiot tomb, which is said to be the Jesus family tomb, not the tomb that he was buried in, Joseph of Arimathea, but his family. And there were all these ossuaries. You remember the ossuary of James, the brother of Jesus, all that stuff that was in the news. But I saw Shimka Yakubovici did a special on that, a documentary on that. And he had a statistician as part of the documentary. And they kept going through all these facts about this tomb and all the people mentioned in the tomb, scratched into the ossuaries, the age, and they took all these facts. And every time they accumulated a new fact in the documentary, they went to the statistician because he said the likelihood that this is the tomb of Jesus' family is like 6 million to 1. And by the time they're at the end of the episode, after they've calculated in all these facts that correlate, they ended up like the statistic was, and I don't remember, it was an abysmally low number. It was like 12 to 1, or something like that, down from 6 million to 1 because of all the names, all the James, the brother of Yesu. They had Joseph, his ossuary, and it was a different name for Joseph. It was a Yas, I think Yasu. was a Hebrew shortening of the name. So stuff like that. So yeah, it's pretty good betting odds, Field Guy, especially when it starts at 6 million to 1.
And Phil Guy seems to think he was a mob boss, which he probably, which is kind of cool. When you look at the whole story, and we're just touching on the Easter side of it, it opens up a lot of doors, but it's a really rotten story to actually have as a celebration. And as I said, I hope tonight we've just made it a little bit more interesting to look at.
And I'm keeping you up, which I like doing anyway.
Well, I didn't actually get much sleep last night because I was awake half the night with my young man, and then I was up incredibly early. So, yeah.
Oh, you're talking Henry? I thought you have a young man. I don't know about this young man. Oh, Henry, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's there. But I thoroughly enjoyed our chat tonight. It was so nice.
I did too.
We put it together with a bit of the old pagan, a bit of the Christianity, and I hope it's made a difference. And, I expect we'll be watching your show on Sunday.
Yes. Yes. You're watching my show on Sunday.
Easter Sunday.
Yes. All right. Wendy, as always, lovely to spend this time with you. And everybody, I hope you enjoyed this program. And we'll be back again next Tuesday doing the same thing.
We will. Very good subject next week. Very good subject. Looking forward to
yes.
Yes.
And we'll tell you about that when the time comes.
Yes.
So, all right, everybody. Thanks for being here. You all have a good rest of your evening. Wendy, you get to bed.
I'm going.
All right. And that's it. Live long and prosper, everyone. See you later.